You never forget the silence of someone who once loved you. Leo Hartley had learned to live with that silence. He carried it in his melodies, tucked it between verses he never released. And on the morning the envelope arrived, he thought it was just another reminder of how people move on and how some wounds don't bleed, but hum quietly through your bones. He was at his small apartment in Portland, the place that once held 2 toothbrushes and 100 dreams. Now it smelled of coffee and cedar-scented candles, the kind he used to mask loneliness. Leo had been teaching vocal lessons over Zoom, helping teenagers find their voice while his own had faded behind studio walls. But the envelope in his mailbox changed something. It was thick, embossed in gold, formal, a wedding invitation. The kind that came from people with enough money to care about fonts. The groom's name, Thomas Rivera. The bride's, Emily Chen. His hands shook. Thomas. He hadn't heard that name aloud in years. Not since Boston. Not since the man he loved packed up a life they built and walked out without a single goodbye. Leo read the card twice, then a third time. It wasn't just an invitation to attend. It was a request. No, a setup. You are cordially invited to perform a special musical piece at our wedding celebration in Napa Valley. Your presence would be a delightful surprise. He remembered the email he had once sent in a moment of heartbreak, the one where he shared a song. Ghost in the Room, written in the hollow of Thomas's absence. No response ever came. No message. No call. Just absence. That song had never been released. It had stayed buried in his hard drive, like so many unsaid things. And now, years later, Thomas was getting married to a music producer, and Leo was being asked to sing, like a footnote in someone else's happy ending. He stared at the ivory card until the letters blurred. The worst part wasn't that Thomas was marrying someone else. The worst part was that they wanted him to help celebrate it. He thought about throwing the card away. He almost did. But that evening, over wine and leftover pad thai, his best friend Rachel looked at him and said, "Then sing." Leo scoffed. "At his wedding." Rachel nodded. "Not for him, for you." Rachel had always seen through him. She was a music teacher for deaf students, someone who understood that silence didn't mean emptiness, it meant depth. When Leo told her about the invitation, she didn't flinch. "You spent years letting him haunt your music. Now you have a chance to step back into the room he left, on your terms." Leo couldn't sleep that night. He opened the folder on his laptop marked "Not for Release." There it was, Ghost in the Room, just piano and voice. One take, one heartbreak. He listened, and listened again. He didn't know what hurt more, the lyrics or the fact that they still felt true. He replied to the RSVP the next morning. He would attend. He would sing, and for the first time in years, Leo Hartley wasn't singing to be heard. He was singing because he had something left to say. If this story moved something in you, if it echoed something you've once lived but never voiced, stay with us, because this is just the beginning. Subscribe for more healing stories on Heart Story. Leo almost backed out the night before the flight. His suitcase sat open, untouched. The invitation lay on the table, still pristine, as if mocking him. The idea of facing Thomas again, standing in front of strangers, in a vineyard soaked in fairy lights, pretending to celebrate a love he was once part of, felt unbearable. But Rachel came over without being asked. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She quietly zipped at his suitcase, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said only, "Not for Thomas, for you. You need to take your voice back." They flew to Napa Valley the next morning. The vineyard estate was breathtaking, elegant, expensive, bathed in soft gold light that made everything look like a memory. From the moment Leo arrived, he sensed something was off. Guests smiled warmly, but some whispered when he passed. He caught glances that lingered a beat too long. Then he met her, Emily Chen. She was gracious, poised, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. When she greeted him, there was no surprise, no polite awkwardness, only a faint smile, like she already knew everything she needed to know. "Leo," she said, extending her hand. It's an honor. I've heard a lot about you. Leo blinked. From Thomas. Her smile didn't falter. From your music. Something in her tone made his chest tighten. But before he could ask more, she excused herself to check on a lighting arrangement, leaving Leo standing there, unsure if he'd just been complimented or cornered. Later, during rehearsal, Leo met with the wedding MC to go over his performance. He offered to sing a recent ballad, simple, gentle, safe, something neutral, but the MC interrupted, glancing at his clipboard. No need. The bride already picked the song. It's something you sent a few years back. Ghost in the Room. I believe. The words hit harder than he expected. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. That song was never released. Well, the MC shrugged. She had a demo. Said it meant a lot to the groom, that it captured history. Leo stepped outside for air. His heart pounded. The song wasn't meant for the world. It was a letter never meant to be read aloud. And now it was being played like a soundtrack to someone else's fairy tale. Rachel found him under an old olive tree. She didn't ask what was wrong. She already knew. They're using it, he said quietly. My goodbye song. They want me to sing it. Rachel's voice was firm, but soft. Then sing it, Leo. But not for them. He looked at her, barely holding back the wave in his chest. You wrote that song in pain, she continued. But tonight it can mean something else. It can be yours again. He stood backstage as the sun dipped behind the hills. The ceremony had ended, and now it was time for the entertainment laughter, clinking glasses, toasts dripping in wine and nostalgia. A hush fell over the courtyard as Leo stepped onto the stage. Thomas was seated at the center table, next to Emily, whose eyes met his without flinching. Thomas didn't look up. Not once. Leo took a breath. The lights were warm, almost blinding. He looked at Rachel in the crowd. She gave a tiny nod. He walked toward the mic. He didn't want to do it, but he had to. He owed it to the man he used to be, to the man who waited in silence for a reply that never came. And as the piano chords rang out across the vineyard, the song began. He was no longer invisible. The first note came out hollow, nearly broken. Leo's fingers trembled against the keys, but his voice, though fragile at first, carried a weight the room wasn't ready for. The courtyard, moments ago alive with laughter and conversation, turned still. Only the wind moved, brushing against tablecloths and flower petals like a breath holding itself back. I left the light on, but you closed the door. Leo sang it as he once wrote it, raw, stripped of harmony, built on nothing but pain. The words held no ornaments, no polished edges. They told of a love that never got to say goodbye, of a presence that lingered long after footsteps had faded. You said love should whisper, but mine needed more. Rachel sat at the back of the audience, hands clasped tightly in her lap, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. She had heard the song before on a rainy night when Leo first shared it, unreleased and trembling, but never like this. Not with this kind of clarity, not with this kind of audience. Emily sat still at the center table, her eyes fixed on Thomas. Not once did she look away. Thomas, however, kept his gaze low, his jaw clenched, his knuckles whitened against the tablecloth. But he didn't move. He didn't run. He let the song happen. Leo's voice grew fuller, steadier, no longer pleading but releasing. The melody swelled, and with it, the room's breath seemed to return. You haunt the spaces where truth used to bloom. The final lines rang like a confession. I was your shadow, but you were the ghost in the room. A silence followed, not the polite kind, but the kind that holds the air hostage. Then Emily stood. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She walked to the MC and pulled the microphone from his hand with the grace of someone who already rehearsed this moment in her head. Be hate dy. Thomas, she said, her voice echoing clearly under the canopy lights. Several heads turned. Some guests glanced at Thomas, Unsure whether this was a planned part of the program, Emily's smile was calm, controlled, but her eyes burned. "But you never told me," she continued, turning now to face the crowd, "that the person who wrote it wasn't some anonymous composer. He was your ex. And this," she gestured toward Leo on stage, "this wasn't just a performance. This was your silence catching up with you." Gasps rippled through the tables. Someone dropped a fork. Thomas finally looked up. Leo stepped back from the mic, frozen. Emily exhaled slowly, as if releasing something long held. "I invited Leo to this wedding," she said, voice unwavering. "Not to celebrate our beginning, but to make sure Thomas faced the ending he never acknowledged." She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply returned the microphone, nodded once to Leo, and walked back to her seat where she didn't sit down. She just stood there watching her guests watch her, as though daring the silence to speak next. Leo's heart pounded, not from shame, but from the strange, unexpected sensation of having been heard, truly heard for the first time. He left the stage quietly, his hands still shaking. Rachel was already there waiting. She opened her arms without a word. He walked into them. The man emptied out. After the song, after Emily's words pierced the illusion, after the stunned silence, Thomas did the only thing he knew how to do. He pulled Emily by the wrist and walked away from the crowd. His steps quick, unsteady. He didn't look at Leo. He didn't speak to the guests. Just disappeared into the side corridor of the estate, trailing confusion and shame behind him. Leo stood near the stage, eyes unfocused, heart hollowed. He wasn't sure what part of himself had just been left there under the canopy of lights, but something had changed. Something had been forced into the open that no longer allowed him to be invisible. Rachel held him firmly by the shoulders. "You did what no one else could," she said softly. "You made the truth impossible to ignore." But Leo wasn't sure what victory felt like. All he felt was exposed, like someone had opened an old wound and left it breathing in front of strangers. The applause hadn't come. No one cheered, but maybe that wasn't the point. As he tried to step away from the crowd, a young woman approached him with a camera hanging from her neck and soft urgency in her voice. "Leo," she asked. "I'm Ella, Emily's cousin. I was filming the wedding." Leo blinked, still caught in the aftermath. "You're the videographer. I guess you could say that, but I'm also the reason Emily found your song." He frowned, unsure what she meant. "I saw it months ago," Ella explained. "I was helping Thomas back up some of his files. There was a folder marked old demos. I played the first one out of curiosity. I didn't expect that." She looked at him with something between apology and admiration. "I showed it to Emily," she continued. "She didn't get angry. She just sat in silence for a long time. Then she asked me to keep it." Leo's voice was barely a whisper. "She knew about the song about me," Ella nodded. "She knew everything. She never told Thomas she'd heard it. She just waited. And when the wedding came up, she asked me to find your contact. She already knew who you were by then." Leo couldn't breathe for a moment. "Why invite me? Why do all of this?" Ella exhaled, eyes softening. "Because she wanted the truth to be part of their beginning, not a secret buried beneath vows. She told me, if he can't be honest about who he's loved, then how can I trust what he says about love at all?" Leo looked away, the vineyard lights blurring in his vision. "I think," Ella added, "she also wanted to give you something back. Closure, maybe. Or your voice." Leo shook his head slowly. "It doesn't feel like closure." "No," she said, "but it might be a beginning." At that, she handed him a flash drive. "This has your original demo, the video from tonight, everything. Emily said it belongs to you now. All of it." Leo took it, unsure what to say. Ella gave him a small smile, then disappeared into the crowd as quietly as she came. He looked around. The tables were being cleared. Conversations had turned hushed. Some guests were leaving early. Others lingered. uncertain whether the evening had ended or simply shifted into something no one had planned for. Rachel returned with 2 glasses of water. "Drink," she said. He did. Then he asked, "Do you think I was wrong to sing it?" Rachel gave him a look. "You sang the truth. Maybe not everyone wanted to hear it, but someone needed to." He looked down at the flash drive in his palm, the weight of a moment he never expected to reclaim. For the first time since Boston, Leo didn't feel like a ghost anymore. The celebration never resumed. The champagne remained untouched. The music faded into silence. The guests slowly dispersed under the warm Napa sky, not with laughter or dancing, but with low murmurs and careful glances. No one spoke of Emily. No one asked where Thomas had gone. It was as if the story had suddenly changed mid-sentence, and no one knew how to read the new lines. Emily stood beneath the archway of the vineyard terrace, her veil removed, her heels in hand, when Thomas returned from wherever he had run to. She didn't cry or scream. She simply looked at him and said only one thing. "I'm not afraid that you once loved someone else. I'm afraid that you never had the courage to say you did." She didn't wait for a reply. Thomas stayed silent. When he finally walked away, he did so alone. Leo watched it all from a distance. Not hidden, but not present either. Like someone who had once been part of the story and now stood at its edge. The pain was still there, quiet, persistent, but it was no longer wrapped in shame. Something had shifted. By morning, most guests had gone. The vineyard returned to stillness. Rachel packed their bags while Leo waited in the lobby. The sun had barely risen when the hotel receptionist handed him an envelope with his name written in sharp, careful cursive. Inside, a handwritten note. "Leo, thank you for not being silent. Last night, you didn't just sing for yourself. You sang for everyone who was ever used as a placeholder, someone to hide behind, to erase the truth. I don't know if I'll forgive Thomas, but I've decided to forgive myself. Emily." Beneath the note was a formal letterhead, a music contract. Emily had signed over full rights for Leo to release "Ghost in the Room" under his own name, with full production support and the promise of creative control. It wasn't just an offer. It was a statement, a recognition, a beginning. Leo stared at it for a long time. Not because he doubted it, but because he wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. That night, back in Portland, Leo stood on the small stage of a local venue where he used to play during quieter years. The place wasn't fancy. No vineyard lights, just a piano, a mic, and Rachel beside him, her fingers gently resting on the keys. He introduced the song by name for the first time in public. "Ghost in the Room." The room wasn't silent this time. It listened. Leo sang it again. Not in pain, not in farewell, but in ownership, in truth. And when the last note fell away, the applause didn't matter as much as the feeling in his chest that he had let go of something he never needed to carry alone. At the end of the performance, Leo looked out into the crowd, his voice soft but certain. "Not everyone who breaks you is meant to come back, but sometimes the song you wrote for them finds its way back to you." Then he smiled, the first real one in a long time. Have you ever given someone a piece of your heart and later had to take it back? Let us know in the comments, because your voice matters too. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth, healing, and second chances only on Heart Story.